Ma'am, step away from the counter right now. You don't belong here. In the middle of a quiet bank, a power-tripping white cop would publicly arrest a calm black woman, completely unaware that the person he was humiliating was a Homeland Security agent who could end his career in minutes. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The bank stood in stillness, wrapped in the soft hum of routine. Sunlight filtered through tall glass windows, stretching across polished marble floors in long, golden reflections. The air carried a quiet rhythm. Keyboards clicking, pens gliding across paper, low voices exchanging numbers and confirmations. It was the kind of place where everything moved with order, where every action had structure, where nothing was meant to disrupt the calm. And then Danielle Carter walked in. She did not rush. She never rushed. Her steps were measured, deliberate, each one placed with quiet confidence that did not seek attention but naturally held it. Dressed in simple, understated clothing, she blended into the environment at first glance. No uniform, no visible authority, nothing that demanded recognition. But there was something else, something subtle, something controlled. The way her eyes moved briefly across the room, not scanning nervously, but observing with quiet precision. The way her posture remained relaxed, yet aligned. The stillness of someone who understood her surroundings completely. Danielle approached the counter, offering a polite nod to the teller, Emily Ross, whose expression softened slightly in response. "Good afternoon," Danielle said, her voice calm, steady. "I need to access my safe deposit box." Emily nodded, typing quickly, her tone professional. "Of course, ma'am. I just need to verify your information." Everything about the interaction was normal, expected, routine. And yet, across the room, Officer Jason Miller noticed her. He had been standing near the entrance, his presence casual but watchful, his attention drifting between customers without focus. Until it stopped. On her. There was nothing loud about Danielle, nothing suspicious in the traditional sense, but something about her composure. The way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she did not react to the environment around her stood out to him. And that was enough. His gaze lingered longer than necessary, his expression tightening slightly as assumption began to form where reason had not. He took a step forward, then another. The quiet rhythm of the bank continued for a moment longer, unaware of the shift already taking place. Danielle remained at the counter, calm, patient, her attention focused on the simple task in front of her. But the air around her had already begun to change, because across the room, Officer Jason Miller had already made a decision, and he had not said a word yet. The shift was subtle at first. A step, then another. The quiet rhythm of the bank continued, but something beneath it began to tighten as Officer Jason Miller closed the distance, his presence cutting through the calm with deliberate intention. He did not approach quietly. His boots struck the marble floor with enough force to draw attention, his posture rigid, his eyes locked onto Danielle as if the decision he had already made needed only to be confirmed. "Ma'am," he said sharply, his voice carrying across the room, louder than necessary, forcing attention onto the moment. Conversations dipped. A keyboard stopped mid-typing. Emily's hands hesitated over the counter. Danielle turned her head slightly, acknowledging him without urgency, her expression unchanged, her posture steady. "Yes," she replied calmly. Miller stepped closer, positioning himself just to the side of her, close enough to assert presence, close enough to disrupt the interaction at the counter. "What exactly are you doing here?" he asked, his tone already edged with suspicion. Emily glanced between them, uncertainty flickering across her face. "Officer, she's just accessing her. I did not ask you." Miller cut her off, his voice sharp, dismissive. The interruption landed hard. Emily fell silent immediately, her shoulders tightening as she stepped back slightly. The room shifted. Danielle's gaze remained steady on Miller. "I am conducting personal business," she said, her tone even controlled. Miller let out a short breath, almost a scoff, shaking his head as if the answer itself was insufficient. "Personal business," he repeated, his voice louder now, drawing more attention. Yeah, I am not buying that. He circled slightly, positioning himself more directly in front of her, forcing her away from the counter without physically touching her yet. The movement was deliberate, territorial. You got identification? He demanded. Danielle paused for a fraction of a second. Not hesitation, but calculation. Then she nodded once. Yes, she said. Slowly, deliberately, she reached in her bag, her movements controlled, visible. She retrieved her ID and held it out toward him. Miller took it quickly, his eyes scanning it with exaggerated scrutiny. Seconds passed. Then his expression tightened further, not because he had found something, but because he had not. Danielle Carter, he read aloud, his tone skeptical. You live across town. He looked up at her again, narrowing his eyes. So what are you really doing here? The question was not a question anymore. It was an accusation. Danielle met his gaze without flinching. I already told you, she replied. The calmness in her voice seemed to irritate him more than anything else. Miller stepped closer again, invading her space fully now. You think you can just walk in here, act like everything is normal, and not raise any flags? He said, his voice rising. The bank had gone nearly silent now. Customers stood still. Phones subtly appeared in hands. The moment had become visible. Danielle remained exactly as she had been from the beginning. Calm, steady, unshaken. There are no flags to raise, she said quietly. Miller's jaw tightened. The lack of reaction, the lack of fear, the lack of anything he could control, it pushed him further. We will see about that, he said, and without warning, his hand reached out, grabbing her wrist, not violently, but firmly enough to assert authority. The contact was deliberate. The line was crossed. Danielle's eyes dropped briefly to his hand, then lifted again to meet his gaze. Her expression did not change, but something behind it sharpened, quiet, precise, unmistakable, because the situation was no longer just escalating. It had become something else entirely. The contact did not break. It settled. Miller's grip around Danielle's wrist remained firm, his fingers pressing just enough to make his intention clear, his stance widening as if anchoring himself in control. The room had gone completely still now. The quiet hum of the bank had vanished, replaced by a tension that pressed into every corner, into every person watching. Miller leaned in slightly, his voice dropping but sharpening. You're going to cooperate, he said, or this gets a lot worse for you. Danielle did not pull her hand away. She did not resist. Her wrist remained where it was, not because she could not move, but because she chose not to. Her gaze stayed locked on his, calm, steady, unshaken. You are already escalating, she said quietly. The words were not loud, but they carried. Miller's jaw tightened immediately. No, he snapped, his voice rising again. You are escalating by refusing to answer simple questions. He tightened his grip slightly, pulling her hand downward, forcing a shift in her posture. Not enough to hurt, but enough to assert dominance. A subtle murmur moved through the room. Someone near the back lifted their phone higher. The moment was no longer just uncomfortable. It was being witnessed. Emily Ross stood frozen behind the counter, her eyes wide, her hands clasped together as if unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Mr. Klein, the bank manager, stepped out from his office, his expression tense. Officer, is there a problem? He asked cautiously. Miller did not look at him. I am handling it, he replied quickly, his attention still fixed on Danielle. Just stay out of it. Danielle's posture adjusted slightly, her balance shifting just enough to absorb the pull without resistance. Her shoulders remained relaxed, her breathing steady. There was no struggle in her movement, only control. You are making assumptions, she said calmly. Miller leaned closer, his face now inches from hers, his voice low but aggressive. I do not make assumptions, he said. I make decisions. The distinction was clear and dangerous. Behind him, a customer stepped back slowly, creating distance, the movement subtle but telling. The air felt tighter now, heavier, as if the structure of the room itself had shifted. Miller's free hand moved to his belt, hovering near his cuffs, not drawing them yet, but making the possibility visible. "Last chance," he said. "You either explain what you're doing here, or you come with me." Danielle held his gaze, her expression unchanged. "I have already explained," she replied. The calmness in her voice did not break. It did not rise. It remained steady, precise. That precision irritated him further. Miller exhaled sharply, shaking his head as if rejecting the answer entirely. "No," he said, "you have not." And with that, his hand moved. Not toward conversation, not toward de-escalation, toward action. His grip shifted from her wrist to her forearm, firmer now, more controlling. The line moved again. Danielle's eyes dropped briefly to his hand, then lifted back to his face. Her expression did not change, but something beneath it had. Something sharper, more defined, because this was no longer a misunderstanding. And standing there, in the center of a silent bank, with control being forced upon her in front of witnesses, Danielle Carter remained exactly as she had been from the beginning, calm, composed, and fully aware. But the situation had already crossed into something that could not be undone. The moment shifted from tension into display. Miller's grip tightened around Danielle's arm, no longer testing, no longer probing, asserting. His hand moved decisively, pulling her a step away from the counter, forcing space between her and the normalcy of the bank. The movement was sharp enough to draw a collective reaction from the room. A chair scraped softly against the floor. Someone gasped under their breath. "That is enough," Mr. Klein said, stepping forward now, his voice strained but attempting authority. "Officer, I think I said I am handling it," Miller snapped, cutting him off without even turning his head. His voice echoed across the marble, louder than it needed to be, louder than the situation justified. The room fell silent again. Danielle allowed herself to be moved, her balance adjusting with quiet precision, her posture never breaking, never collapsing under the force. She did not resist, but she did not yield either. Her stillness remained intact, almost separate from what was happening to her. Miller repositioned himself in front of her again, his grip shifting to both arms now, controlling, performative. "You are coming with me," he said. "We're going to figure out exactly what you are doing here." The words were not an invitation. They were a declaration. Danielle met his gaze, calm, steady, unflinching. "You do not have grounds to detain me," she said quietly. Miller let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking his head as if dismissing something trivial. "I do not need your permission," he replied. His hand moved again, faster this time, reaching for his cuffs. The metallic click, as they came free, cut through the silence like a signal. The room shifted. Not just tension now, fear. Emily took a step back behind the counter, her eyes wide. A customer near the door raised their phone higher, recording openly now. The moment had crossed from discomfort into something undeniable. Miller grabbed Danielle's wrist again, more forcefully this time, pulling it behind her back. The motion was abrupt, controlling, designed to break posture, to assert dominance. But Danielle's body absorbed the movement without resistance, her stance adjusting seamlessly, her balance never fully compromised. "You are resisting," Miller said loudly, though nothing in her movement supported the claim. The statement was for the room. For the record, he was already creating in his mind. Danielle's voice remained calm. "No," she said, "I am not." The simplicity of the response only fueled him further. "You are done talking," he snapped. And with that, he snapped the first cuff into place. The sound echoed, sharp, final, unmistakable. A ripple moved through the bank. No one spoke. No one intervened. They watched. Miller secured the second cuff quickly, tightening it with unnecessary force, his movements sharp, controlled, but edged with something unstable. "You are being detained," he announced, his voice loud, authoritative, performative. Danielle stood there, her hands restrained behind her back, her posture still upright, her breathing steady, her expression unchanged. No panique, no raised voice, no straged, just stillness. And within that stillness, something deeper. Miller stepped back slightly, scanning the room as if expecting validation. It did not come. The silence remained, heavy. Watching. Danielle lifted her gaze to meet his once more, calm as ever. "You are making a mistake," she said quietly. The words were not dramatic, not emotional, but precise, measured. And as the echo of the cuffs settled into the space, the bank no longer felt like a place of routine. It felt like a moment suspended, just before something irreversible unfolded. The words lingered in the air. "You are making a mistake," but Miller did not hear them as a warning. He heard them as defiance. And defiance, in his mind, justified everything that came next. He stepped closer again, his hand gripping Danielle's arm more firmly now, guiding, no, forcing, her a step forward. "You should have thought about that before you decided to play games," he said, his voice sharp, carrying across the silent bank. Danielle moved with the force, not resisting, not stumbling, her posture still aligned, her balance still intact despite the restraints behind her back. Her composure remained unchanged, untouched by the pressure, untouched by the eyes now fixed on her from every direction. Miller glanced around the room briefly, his chest rising with controlled breath, as if expecting agreement, approval, something to validate what he had just done. It did not come. The silence held, tight, watching. He turned back to her, irritation flashing again. "What exactly did you think was going to happen?" he demanded. "You walk in here, act suspicious, refuse to answer questions, and I just let you go." Danielle's gaze met his, steady as ever. "I answered your questions," she said calmly. The simplicity of the statement only sharpened his frustration. "No," he snapped, "you avoided them." His grip tightened again, pulling her slightly off center, forcing her to adjust. But again, she did so without resistance, her body absorbing the movement with quiet control. "You are building something that does not exist," she said. Miller let out a short, dismissive laugh. "I am building a case," he replied. The words came quickly, confidently, but hollow. Danielle held his gaze for a moment longer, then spoke again, her tone unchanged, but carrying something deeper now. "Then you should be very careful with what you include in it." The statement landed differently, not defensive, not emotional, precise, measured. Miller's expression tightened. "You do not get to tell me how to do my job," he said, his voice dropping slightly, more controlled, more pointed. Danielle did not respond immediately. The pause stretched, subtle but heavy. Then quietly, she said, "You are already doing that yourself." The words settled into the space, sharper than anything louder could have been. Miller's jaw flexed, his patience thinning further. "All right," he said abruptly, pulling her another step forward, turning her slightly toward the exit. "We are done here. You are coming with me." The declaration was final, the escalation complete. Around them, the crowd did not move. Phones remained raised. Eyes remained fixed. No one spoke. No one intervened. The moment had moved beyond uncertainty into something undeniable. Danielle allowed herself to be guided toward the door, her steps steady, unhurried, her presence still grounded despite the restraints. She did not look at the crowd. She did not acknowledge the silence. Her focus remained forward, and just before they reached the threshold, she spoke again, quietly, precisely. "Officer Miller," she said. He stopped, not fully, but just enough to turn his head slightly. "What?" he asked, impatience cutting through the word. Danielle did not turn to face him. "This is your last opportunity," she said. The tone was not raised, but it carried something unmistakable. Finality. Miller let out a short, incredulous breath, shaking his head as a faint, dismissive smirk returned. "No," he replied. "This is exactly where I need to be." And with that, he pulled her forward again, unaware that the moment he believed he controlled had already slipped beyond his reach. The glass doors slid open with a soft mechanical hum, and the outside light spilled across the polished floor, cutting a sharp line between the controlled order of the bank and the uncertainty beyond it. Miller stepped forward, guiding Danielle with a firm grip, his posture rigid, his movements sharp, as if every step needed to reinforce the authority he believed he still held. Behind them, the bank remained silent. No one followed. No one spoke. The weight of what had just happened stayed inside, watching them leave. Outside, the air felt different, cooler, quieter, stripped of the structured calm of the bank. The patrol car sat waiting, engine idling, its presence now the center of the scene. Miller moved her toward it with practiced motion, his hand tightening briefly on her arm as he positioned her beside the vehicle. "Turn around," he ordered. Danielle complied without hesitation, her movements steady, controlled, her posture unchanged despite the restraints. The metal of the car reflected the fading light, distorting the moment into fragments. Her stillness, his tension, the imbalance that no longer felt stable. Miller reached for his radio, his voice sharp, controlled. "Dispatch, I have one detained for suspicious activity. Transporting now." The words came easily, too easily, as if saying them would solidify the version of events he had already decided on. Danielle remained still, her gaze forward, her breathing even. Then quietly she spoke. "You are about to file a report," she said. Miller did not turn immediately. "That is correct," he replied, his tone clipped. Danielle's voice remained calm, but there was something beneath it now, something colder, more defined. "Everything you write," she continued, "everything you say becomes part of a federal record." The word federal hung in the air. Subtle, precise. Miller paused for just a fraction of a second, then scoffed, shaking his head as he turned back toward her. "You really think that matters right now?" he said. Danielle met his gaze, her expression unchanged. "It will," she replied. The certainty in her voice did not rise. It settled. Heavy. Miller exhaled sharply, dismissing it with a small, careless wave of his hand. "You are not the first person to say something like that," he said, "and you will not be the last." Danielle held his gaze for a moment longer, then spoke again, each word deliberate. "I am giving you one last opportunity to correct this," she said. The phrasing was not emotional. It was procedural, final. Miller stared at her, then let out a short laugh, the sound hollow, dismissive. "No," he said. "What you are getting is exactly what you earned." The arrogance returned, but thinner now, stretched across something less certain. He reached for the car door, pulling it open with a sharp motion, preparing to place her inside, to finish what he had started. Danielle did not resist. She did not step back, but as the moment hovered, just before it closed, her voice came one last time. Quiet, unmistakable. "Then you have chosen how this ends." Miller did not respond. He did not pause. He simply moved forward, convinced the situation was already decided. And in that decision, he closed the last door he would ever be offered. The car door had just begun to close when everything changed. It was not loud at first, not dramatic, just a shift, subtle, precise, unmistakable. "Officer Miller," Danielle said, her voice calm, cutting cleanly through the moment. He paused, not fully, just enough. Enough for the word to land differently this time. "Officer." She did not struggle. She did not pull away, but her posture straightened, not against the cuffs, but beyond them. Her presence shifted in a way that could not be ignored. "Before you take another step," she continued, her tone steady, "I suggest you listen carefully." Miller frowned slightly, irritation flickering across his face, but something else followed it. Uncertainty. Just a fraction. "You are under the assumption that you are in control of this situation," she said. "You are not." The words did not rise. They settled. Heavy. Measured. Final. Miller's grip on the door tightened slightly, his jaw setting as he forced confidence back into place. "You do not get to Special Agent Danielle Carter," she said, cutting through him without raising her voice. "Department of Homeland Security." The silence that followed was immediate, absolute. The engine of the patrol car still hummed. The wind moved faintly across the pavement, but everything else stopped. Miller did not move. His hand remained on the door, but the motion had frozen mid-action, as if his body had lost the instruction to continue. His eyes locked onto her, searching, processing, rejecting, and failing. "That is not," he started, but the sentence did not finish. It could not. Danielle turned her head. Slightly, her gaze meeting his fully now, steady, unshaken. "You just detained a federal agent," she said. in a secured financial institution, in front of witnesses, and you have already initiated a report. Each word landed with precision, not rushed, not emphasized, just stated. Miller's grip loosened slightly. The car door drifted an inch, then stopped. His breathing changed. Slower, uneven. His eyes flicked toward her cuffs, then back to her face, then toward the bank behind them, as if searching for something that would undo what had just been said. Nothing did. The world had already shifted. That report, Danielle continued, is now part of a federal record. Miller swallowed. His throat tightened, his voice thinner when it came. You did not say, you did not ask, she replied. The correction was simple. Final. The silence deepened. Miller stepped back, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough. Enough to break the posture he had held since the beginning. His authority did not collapse loudly. It folded inward piece by piece. Take the cuffs off, she said. The command was quiet, but absolute. Miller hesitated, not out of defiance, but because, for the first time, he did not know how to proceed. His hands moved slowly, stiffly toward the cuffs. The metal clicked open, one side, then the other. Each sound echoed louder than it should have. Final. Danielle brought her hands forward, adjusting her wrists calmly, as if the moment had not broken anything in her at all. Miller stepped back again, his posture no longer rigid, no longer certain. His eyes did not meet hers now. They could not. And standing there, beside the same patrol car he had believed was his control, Officer Jason Miller realized something he had never considered before. He was no longer the authority in this situation, and he never had been. The silence after the cuffs clicked open did not feel like relief. It felt like exposure. Miller's hands hovered for a moment longer, unsure where to go now that the authority he had relied on had vanished completely. The space around them had changed. The bank behind them was no longer just a building, it was a witness. Phones were still raised. Eyes were still watching. But now, they were not watching Danielle. They were watching him. Danielle adjusted her wrists calmly, the faint imprint of the cuffs already fading beneath her steady composure. She did not step toward him. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. You're going to notify your supervisor, she said, her tone even, precise. Immediately, Miller swallowed, his throat dry, his voice struggling to form. I can explain, you will, she replied. But not to me. The distinction landed hard. Final. Miller reached for his radio with stiff, uncertain hands, his movements no longer controlled, no longer confident. Dispatch, he began, his voice uneven. He paused, reset, tried again, requesting supervisor on site. The words came out slower this time, heavier. Behind him, the bank doors opened again. Customers stepped out cautiously, drawn by the shift they could not ignore. The moment had changed sides. Miller lowered the radio slightly, his eyes flicking toward Danielle, but he could not hold her gaze. He looked away almost immediately. Danielle stood still, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, her authority now unmistakable. Minutes passed differently now. Not tense, not chaotic, just waiting. When the supervisor vehicle arrived, the scene did not escalate. It settled. Captain Laura Simmons stepped out, her presence controlled, her gaze moving quickly across the situation. The open patrol car, the gathered witnesses, Miller standing off balance, and Danielle Carter standing still, composed, undeniable. Report, Simmons said. One word. Direct. Miller hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Enough for everything to be understood before he even spoke. I detained her, he said, his voice low, on suspicion of she is Homeland Security. Simmons cut in, her tone sharp, not loud, but absolute. Miller's shoulders dropped slightly. The last thread of control snapped. Simmons turned toward Danielle, her posture shifting subtly, respect replacing authority. Ma'am, she said, I apologize for this situation. Danielle gave a small, controlled nod. Understood, she replied. Then she looked back at Miller. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just clarity. Your report, she said, is now evidence. The words settled into him, heavier than anything else had. Simmons stepped forward, her tone firm again. "Officer Miller, step aside." He did, immediately, without argument, without resistance. And in that single step, everything that had defined him minutes ago disappeared. He was no longer the one giving orders. He was the one being removed from them. And standing there, under the same fading light, with the same witnesses, Danielle Carter remained exactly as she had been from the beginning. Calm, composed, and completely in control. The difference was now everyone understood why. The tension that had once defined the space dissolved slowly, not all at once, but in quiet layers. The flashing lights dimmed, their reflections no longer sharp against the glass of the bank behind them. Voices returned, low and measured. As the gathered witnesses began to shift, their attention no longer fixed on confrontation, but on what remained after it. The moment had passed. What lingered was understanding. Officer Miller stood off to the side now, no longer at the center of anything. His posture subdued, his presence diminished in a way that could not be reversed by words or explanation. He did not speak. He did not move with purpose. He simply stood there, part of a scene that no longer belonged to him. Captain Simmons spoke quietly with her team, her tone controlled, her instructions precise, ensuring that the situation would be documented correctly, that what had happened would not be lost in interpretation. Procedure returned, but this time it carried weight. Danielle Carter remained where she stood for a moment longer, her posture unchanged, her composure intact. There was no visible shift in her expression, no outward acknowledgement of what had unfolded. Only stillness, only clarity, the same quiet authority she had carried from the beginning. Emily Ross stepped out from the bank entrance cautiously, her earlier uncertainty replaced with something softer, more grounded. She met Danielle's gaze briefly, offering a small nod. Respect, recognition, understanding, all without words. Danielle returned it just as simply. No more was needed. The world, slowly, resumed. Cars passed in the distance. The soft hum of the street returned. The structure that had been disrupted settled back into place. Danielle turned toward the bank once more, her steps measured, deliberate, as if returning to a task briefly interrupted rather than a moment that had just redefined everything around her. She walked through the doors without hesitation, the quiet interior receiving her once again. Inside, the air felt different now, not tense, not uncertain, but aware. People moved with subtle shifts in posture, in tone, in presence. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. Danielle approached the counter again, her voice calm, steady, unchanged. "I would still like to access my safe deposit box," she said. Emily nodded immediately, her professionalism returning, but now carried with something deeper, respect. "Of course, ma'am," she replied. The process resumed. Quiet, ordered, as if the moment outside had not interrupted anything, but clarified everything. And as Danielle Carter stood once more within that calm, her presence steady, her purpose unchanged, the world around her did not need to ask who she was. It already knew, because what had been disrupted had not just been resolved. It had been restored, and in that restoration, there was peace. What makes this story resonate is not simply the reversal of power, but the way power revealed itself without ever changing form. Officer Miller believed authority was something visible, something enforced through control, proximity, and pressure. But what he encountered was a kind of authority that does not need to announce itself, because it operates within a structure far larger than any individual moment. Danielle Carter never raised her voice, never resisted in the way he expected, because she understood something he did not. When power is rooted in legitimacy, it does not react to challenge, it absorbs it. And in doing so, it allows the challenge to expose itself completely. What unfolded was not a confrontation, but a demonstration of how fragile borrowed authority can be when it is separated from accountability. The most striking part is that nothing about Danielle changed from beginning to end. Only the perception of her did. And that shift is where the truth lives. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.